welcome to Elements of Ayurveda, Empowering Wisdom of Life. I'm your host, Colette, and in this podcast, I hope to empower you to take charge of your own health by sharing the holistic teachings of Ayurveda, the ancient healing tradition from India. We will also discuss topics like health and wellness, nutrition, yoga, fitness, meditation, breath work, and much more, as well as interviewing lots of inspiring people along the way. My humble wish is to help you to connect to your true nature, to Mother Nature, and to each other. If you like the content, be sure to subscribe to the show, and the new episodes will automatically download for you to enjoy. If you're new to Ayurveda, I recommend you listen to the first couple of episodes where I do an introduction to Ayurveda and the mind-body types. I've also set up a Facebook group for us to connect and to support each other, and I'd love for you to join me over at Elements of Ayurveda podcast group. And now, here's the show. Hello, and welcome to Elements of Ayurveda. Today, I'm very excited to introduce Kathryn Templeton, who has devoted her life to the health of others. A psychotherapist for more than 30 years, she continues to work both clinically and as an educator, specializing in the treatment of individuals with complex trauma, anxiety, depression, and now ASD, or autism spectrum disorder. Kathryn is a certified yoga therapist, para-yoga teacher, NAMA-registered Ayurvedic practitioner, and has worked to develop specialized treatments in integrating the principles of yoga and Ayurveda with clinical therapeutic techniques. She is the founder and director of the Himalayan Institute professional certification programs, which include the Ayurvedic Specialist Program, the Ayurvedic Health Counselor Program, the Ayurvedic Yoga Therapist Program, and the Yoga International Online Certification Program, and a new one, which is 3WT, or 3 Wisdom Traditions Wellness Counseling Program. My goodness, Kathryn, that's a wealth of programs there. I love it.
Guess my dosha.
I know, right? Maybe a little bit pitta in there.
We like to spread, you know how it is.
But it's fantastic. That's, I love seeing all these courses available for people. It means that Ayurveda is getting out there more and more into the world. So thank you, Kathryn, for coming on the show today. And I'm excited to delve into this conversation, particularly excited about how you're taking your 30 years of work as a psychotherapist and then combining that with yoga and Ayurveda. But before we get into that, I would love to ask you about your journey with Ayurveda. How did it come into your life?
Well, it was a byproduct, actually, of my own bereavement issues that I had been working as a trauma therapist at the National Center for PTSD back at the 1989 in West Haven, Connecticut at the VA hospital. And my brother had been a medic in the Vietnam War. And so I was drawn to sort of better understand that, understand him and understand that experience. So I went to work at the VA, and I'd been practicing a little bit of yoga, kind of like once a Sunday, every other month, that sort of practice.
Right.
And I didn't really understand what I was doing, except it was something that made me keep coming back. And I noticed in the guys that we worked with, of course, one of the major problems for folks with war trauma is sleep issues because the dysregulated nervous system and so forth. And I came upon some book, and I don't know where I found it. It was somewhere in the Yale Library about body oiling. And I'm sure the word abhyanga was in there, but of course I would have no idea what it was. Mm-hmm. And I first came to experience the treatment of soothing the nervous system through self-oil massage. And I thought, this will be great. I'll tell all the guys at the morning rounds about oiling their bodies and they'll sleep better. This will be great. I'm like 24 or 25 at the time. So I go into the meeting. Most of our clients, these war veterans are in their 40s, and our clinical staff is there, and I'm the intern on the unit. And I walk in with my big bottle of oil, and I sit down, and I proceed to stand up and explain to all of these men that I think we should all body oil to help ourselves sleep. And you can imagine how well that went over. Yeah, it was just a nightmare. But
Such good intentions.
No, I just didn't have a lot of wisdom then. And so, but a lot of enthusiasm. And so, that didn't go over well. But one of the guys on the unit, you know, these folks really, they want to get better.
Yeah.
And so he sort of took me up on the offer to learn about self-body oiling with his psychologist. And we talked about the protocol. And over the course of the weekend, when we came back, whether it's placebo or not, he reported in the rounds that my method had been of use to him.
Wow.
And so I thought, well, there's something to that. And then flash forward a couple of years, maybe 8 or 10 years, and my father passes away. And I was very, very close to my dad. And I was starting to was confused whether I was still in bereavement or if I was actually going into more of a depressive cycle. And I thought all my Western psychology interventions weren't working. The yoga practice I'd learned to date were calming, but I was somewhat tamasic. And I wasn't able to get enough movement forward to kind of get me out of this inertia. And I dove into Ayurvedic medicine. I thought, let's figure out the science behind yoga and why I'm stuck. And that's what really brought me into my education of Ayurvedic medicine. It actually used the techniques of Dinacharya and of six tastes, and was more skillful at using my yoga practices, to be honest with you, so that I could create some momentum, some rajas to sort of propel me out of that elongated bereavement. And here I am today.
Wow, that's a great story. Thank you for sharing that. So in the past episodes, I have talked about tamas and rajas, but just to explain to listeners that the tamas is that, like you said, is that feeling of inertia, no get up and go. They're just that inability to have that fire inside. So you use food and your practices to stimulate that rajas.
Yeah, absolutely. And I study with Yoga Rupa Rod Stryker and at the Himalayan Institute with Pandit Rajmani Tignwe. And both of these teachers are tantric in their tradition and the way that we work through the Himalayan Institute. So breathing practices are very, very important in our ability to really navigate prana, to really use prana with wisdom and skill in our practices to either create more steadiness and calmness, a cooling sensation, or an energizing and sort of a stimulating sensation. And so I really leaned into those practices in my yoga practice, probably more so than asana at the time, because my lethargy wasn't in my body. It was really in my mind.
Right. And I do think that pranayama, breath work, is the most effective tool that we have. It's the simplest, it's the easiest, and it's such an effective tool to make changes, whether you said it's cooling or calming or energizing. It's so easy for people to access that.
Right. Yeah. Everybody can do it.
Yeah.
You don't have to be a bendy person or
have
long legs or whatever the idea is, the fantasy is that makes yoga better, which is also not true. But the other thing is that, pranayama doesn't have a long shelf life. So you really have to do those practices every single day. And that was something that I'm sure my yoga teachers told me time and time again, but I was finally being able to have a place to hear it when I started studying the science of Ayurveda to understand, again, how to more skillfully use these methods to support my mental and physical health. Yeah,
and that's it. It's holistic in nature. So you're able to bring everything back into balance.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
It's a blessing. Yep.
Yeah. And so tell me now, what does Ayurveda mean to you? Since it has such a big impact on your life, what does it mean to you now personally and professionally?
Well, let's see. So I'm noted for being long-winded. So let me try to be succinct.
You can go for it. Say whatever you feel like saying.
Well, personally, Ayurveda is something that the Ayurvedic principles, let's say, the daily routine, my morning anchors, my evening anchors, my what informs my decision around nourishing myself versus eating. I'm a big proponent of separating those two ideas. leaning into the 80-20 rule about, how I, again, nourish myself and what I choose to take in with my reading or television or online or friends and so forth. All of that has become sort of integrated within me because I've been practicing for a long time. So my personal life and Ayurveda aren't really separate anymore.
Right.
Right. It's just how I live my life now, and it's great and easy and makes a lot of sense. I live in New England. Mm-hmm. So if I forget we're in winter, the snow will remind me. If I forget we're in summer, the heat will remind, it's easier because I can just sort of move along with what's happening in nature. Mm-hmm. And it keeps me in closer contact with that more sattvic quality that nature provides versus, being inside my house or inside my office and the television on or the radio on, and I can't really discern what's happening outside. So in my personal world, I'd say Ayurveda helps me feel more closely aligned to the nature herself in the outer world, as well as my internal nature. Mm-hmm. So it's become sort of ordinary for me. In my professional world, Ayurveda has been a real opportunity to support people in ways I didn't even know were possible prior to my awakening to Ayurveda in the clinical field. So, for example, I knew from my educators in graduate school and in my internships how to begin to use theories of psychology and paradigms like CBT and DBT and so forth in working with individuals. But I struggled with offering them support outside the therapy session. Mm-hmm. I was like, well, there's a group therapy you could attend, or, here's a book you might want to read. But I really, outside of that, I was not educated when I was coming through the School of Psychology about a lot of things we could offer people on the 24-hour cycle of the day. Yeah. So running into, literally into Ayurveda and yoga practices gave me all of this new equipment in my toolbox that I could offer clients in session as a take-home, so that they could begin to create their own structure and support at home in whatever fit their family culture. My clients all have different cultural backgrounds, and so every culture has its own relationship to the 24-hour clock.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And what I love to hear is that you experienced this in your own life. And you went through your own healing with Ayurveda, and then you obviously reaped the benefits of that, and it brought you back into a sattva. And now you're using that in your practice, that experience that you went through, which is what I love. And I really think is key about Ayurveda is that when we experience the benefits in our own body, that just speaks volumes then when we go forward and recommend different dinacharya or foods to our own clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And the best for me, I always use myself as a subject. So teacher as object is kind of how I operate. And whether I'm working with groups of people or with individuals, I often talk about the ways in which I've completely screwed it up. How I've completely, I've really messed it up many, many times and continually, and also about, hitting bumps. And, that's important to share with people because it makes it less intimidating. It normalizes things and gives them an opportunity to be incredibly authentic with what they can do at this moment.
Absolutely.
You can't do it.
Yeah, and it's so important for everyone to realize that you have to, meet yourself where you are right now, and there's progress, not perfection. And I too do that. I'm here because I was so imbalanced and went through my own healing journey, and that's how us healers come on board then, because we've experienced this ourselves and we want to help others.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So now tell me how you're combining these sister sciences of yoga and Ayurveda with psychology and taking in that 30 years of experience you have in Western psychology and combining these holistic ancient teachings. I think it's amazing. Can you tell me how you bring that? You touched on it a moment ago, but how you bring that into your work?
Well, the way I educate people depends on I always say what your home court is. Do you come from the tradition of yoga? Is that really where you mostly have a foothold? Do you come from the tradition of psychology or counseling, let's say, and make it broader, social work, nurses, licensed counselors, or even pure counselors? Or do you come from the field of Ayurveda or herbology? Some people are herbologists that we work with. They're not really particularly trained in Ayurvedic medicine, but more in Western herbology. So it really depends on what your stronghold is. And what I suggest is that you allow yourself to be the expert in your field, to own what you know, and then to let yourself be a beginner in the other two fields. And every time you start to see a thread that you can weave back to your home court, take it and weave it back. So, for example, in Western psychology, we talk about neuropathways, right? Well, we can take that thread and we can weave it all the way over to the science of yoga and talk about samskara. We can take that thread and weave it into Ayurveda and talk about what happens with our kaveguna, what happens with understanding the way our ancestral behaviors are imprinted in our current expression of dosha. So there's natural intersections. And so that's what I highlight first to build the base of what I call the healing hammock.
Great. I love it.
And so I'm a tantric. And so we're all tantra. One of the meanings is to weave, to weave with protection.
Yes.
So tantra is the weaving together. And this is perfect for a trauma therapist because one of the things we articulate to our clients and is a very important point in the recovery of our full functioning from trauma is to remember that we're not our trauma. Our trauma happened to us, but we're not our trauma. It's another storyline in our lives, and at some point we will digest it. We will assimilate what's necessary to keep on board. We'll let go at some point of what's no longer serving us, and we'll move through. That's how you have hope as a trauma therapist. You hold that for your client while they can't. So if that's the principle and one of the principles in trauma therapy, that same weaving together is true whether it's your right knee that hurts because of your history of being an athlete and now, you're trying to work on how to heal that knee, or if in yoga practice you're struggling with not finding any meaning in your life because you're either disconnected from your authentic self or you're not feeling in alignment with your community, whatever those disconnects are, some of them catastrophic, like in trauma, some of them more mundane, like in an overuse of an injury, and something that may be more spiritual, whatever that disconnect is, from my perspective, it's an opportunity to find a way to weave in one of these healing traditions to be able to support you to become more fully realized.
Beautiful. Yeah. So it's very much tailored to each person, to each individual's story.
Yeah.
Okay,
oh, yeah.
Great. So you talked about, I loved how you said you are not your trauma. And can you talk about that a little bit more? And obviously, it's very individualized, the treatments that you recommend for each individual. But I'd love to talk about stress response and how it manifests in the body and mind, and then go down that area of how we mentioned earlier before we started recording about how your dosha tendency is not your psychology. So I'd love to talk about stress response now and how it may manifest in each dosha or mind-body type.
Yeah, that's my favorite things to talk about because, you are not your stress. So just like you are not your trauma, you are not your stress, you are not your knee. Yoga Rupa always tells us when we're in chaturanga for a minute, you're not the doer. Well, I'm like shuddering. My triceps are coming off my arms and I'm like, I think I am, Rod. And he's like, no, you're not, Kathryn. I'm like, all right. So, so the reality is that in Ayurvedic medicine, we have dosha prakriti or dosha constitution, which is your physical body. It's the layout of your bones and your eyes and your hair. And no matter what your plastic surgeon may do, you are still that dosha,
Yep.
That doesn't change. But it feels like it changes over the course of our life cycle because we move in and out of our different stages of life, right? So people feel as though their constitution changes, but it doesn't. It just goes in and out of balance, in and out of, or vikriti. The mind, right, changes. So our manas, our mental constitution can and will change over the course of time dependent upon what our daily actions are. That's how we change our mind. So when you think about this, in modern Ayurveda, or at least in the West in Ayurveda, we have these dosha tests that people take. And I'm a big proponent of take them and then forget about them.
Yes, me too.
Yeah, because they just get you all confused.
They do. It's a great starting step. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's kind of like in research, like every researcher I've ever worked with in psychiatry is like, oh gosh, not Kathryn, because I'm so terrible at being clean in my research. I like nod my head like, you feel like that, right? It's just totally misleading to the research. It's not clean. Okay. And that's how dosha tests can be. Like if I write the dosha test for my highly Pittic Prakriti, then I'm going to have a whole point of view that you might not from a more Vatic or Kapic Prakriti because of our tendency. So herein lies the big, I think, confusion in dosha tests is when we get to tendency, because your tendency, if you're big boned and have a heavier mass in general, like a kapha dominant person would, then you're going to experience your heaviness when it goes out of balance in a more guru or heavy, that quality you'll experience more. That's your tendency when you go out of balance. If you're more Vatic and you have more of a light, hypermobile tendency or more mobility in your movement in general, then when you go out of balance with Vata, you'll experience those tendencies more dynamically. So it's not, but that's not our psychology. That's our tendency because of our physical body. So, for example, I'm Pitta dominant, right? So, and I've got Kapha and Vata, but they're both in the way back seat, of the car. They're in the way back. Pitta's in the front seat. Oh my Lord, that's good. But I'm up there. And so what happens with me is that my tendency in stress is to get mad because my tendency is fire.
Right.
Nature's always my tendency whenever I start to get imbalanced, even when Vata blows on me a little bit, I get hot because I'm already hot.
Yes.
So my tendency in stress response is going to be get angry first and figure it out later. That's not necessarily great. Okay. That's not always worked well for me, but it's been my nature. So what I have to do is learn how to deal with my tendency and then become in better relationship to Sattva, because she will automatically support keeping that dosha nature in balance. Sattva is harmony, right?
Exactly. Sattva is balance. Just to explain it, can you explain the Sattva a little bit for the listeners?
Yeah. So Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, let's talk about them in relationship to each other with psychology.
Great.
So tendency, just to say again, on dosha test, your tendency is not your psychology. It's the tendency because of your physical nature, which means the elements, the earth, wind, fire, air, and ether. That's your dosha. Psychology in Ayurvedic medicine is your spirituality and your mind and your mental processes. Those two together are your psychology. And of course, they're informed by your dosha, right? But they're different. So Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas as our spiritual psychology, if you will. When we're in Sattva, we're in light, balance, harmony, and we're looking to build more light, balance, and harmony. That's the quality of Sattva. When we're in Tamas, on the other end of the continuum, and if you look at Sankhya philosophy, it's a really very easy correlate to make. The mind's nature is sattvic. Believe it or not, our mind's nature is spaciousness, ease, and harmony. It may not feel like it.
Right.
It may not feel like it in traffic, but that's what it is. So I have no original thoughts. I'm not making it up. That's what Sankhya says. But Tamas, if you look at the other end of the creation model with Sankhya, Tamas is everything that is inert or gross or dense or has matter. So the doshas come out of Tamas because you can't see through my leg. It's dense. Those molecules are put together very tightly. So when Tamas is in the mind, we see a density, an inertia. Ignorance is considered tamasic. We can see a heavy quality, a wet, gooey mire, like mud, like the image of the lotus rising from the mud, right?
Yes.
The mud is the tamas. And it's a necessary part of our psychology to have as we're living on the earth. Because if you've read the news, or I guess people listen to it now, but if you've listened to the news, there's a lot of unconscious, repetitive, dark, heavy behavior.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have to be able to deal with it. Mm-hmm. So you have to have that steadiness. Like one of the reasons we love tamas in a healthy sense is gravity.
Yeah.
Right? She holds us to the earth.
Right.
So it's not that tamas is all bad, but you want to be able to understand how to offer the tamasic quality of the mind in such a way that it doesn't get you bogged down in this unconscious inertia and immobility.
Right, exactly.
And the middle is rajas. And rajas is simply energy. And it's just movement, the refinement of the stars, the shining out, it's passion, it's change. And in the Vedas, they talk about it as the day, the night, and the sunrise and sunset. Right? So when you're in sunrise, when you're looking at the sunrise, it doesn't last a long time, right?
Right.
And what it does is it shifts us out of the darkness of night, and it gives us great movement as the sun births. She rises up into our conscious awareness and creates sattva, daytime. And as the sun shines in our mind, as we see things, we call it vidya, we have clear seeing, we see the light of consciousness, and then we go through movement again, whatever those actions might be. The sunset doesn't last a long time. It's, often beautiful, very passionate, very intense. Mm-hmm. And then we're plummeted back into darkness and inertia.
So back to tamas.
Yeah, back to tamas. And you see that in all of our lives all the time, right? We're constantly modulating through sunrise, sunset, and darkness. And the goal in Ayurvedic medicine, as is in the goal of yoga, as is in the goal of Western psychology, here we have this unification again, is to keep swinging the pendulum towards sattva.
So to stop the pendulum swinging so wildly from one emotion to another.
That's right.
Wow.
That's right. And a lot of us experience that as being boring.
Yeah. Right.
And that's a misnomer. And that's sort of interesting. I mean, it's fascinating to me what, just watching the growth of my children. I've got a 23-year-old daughter and a 21 and 17-year-old son. And my 23-year-old daughter didn't grow up with technology in this way. Okay. I mean, she had AOL.
Right.
What are you going to do? And a flip phone, I think, which is my youngest grew up. He used to make rap videos on YouTube when he was 9.
Wow.
Yeah. We did family rap. It wasn't pretty.
Oh, my goodness.
But so, that think about, and what is that? That's all rajas.
Yes.
Just super rajasic. But as you sit and watch it, if you sit and watch these videos or you sit and listen, what are you doing as a physical body? You are sitting. Right. You are becoming tamasic. And this is true. The same cycle happens in trauma response, where we move from a hypomanic state, this hypervigilance, almost every time the phone rings, it's going to be bad because something bad happened last time the phone rang, right? Yeah. We get triggered. Yeah. We go into all this movement, and it's all around us. But the reality is nothing's happening. We're not experiencing trauma again.
Right. So it's a belief system?
Well, it's actually gets hardwired in the physical body, in the brain.
Okay.
And that's what happens is the amygdala complex, the hippocampal complex, it calls up and we call it triggered in Western psych. We get re-stimulated and we start to be protective because our body, the organism's desire is to stay alive. Mm-hmm. People think it's procreation. That's number 2. Number 1 is stay alive. Number 2 is procreate. Okay. I don't care what any of the boys tell you on the playground with the girls. Not it. So yeah, they're lying.
Now we know.
Listen, my mother told me, Saint Ruthie told me. So what happens is the body goes into protective mode. Mm. So think about it with our sunset, daytime, nighttime analogy. We stay in that state of movement for a long time. What will happen eventually is we'll get exhausted. Right. And so our psychological and spiritual foundation, right, the Rajas, Tamas, Sattva concept, that is going to begin to get more and more exhausted, heavy, dark, inert because of all this hyper movement. We can't sustain Rajas for long. Remember, the sunset's only a few minutes.
Yes.
So what happens in the cycle of trauma experience is that you get hyperstimulated, the adrenals turn on, all the cortisol spills and bathes the body, which is a eroding quality in the body. Yeah. And over the course of time, we have less and less access to our ability to self-regulate, and we tend to stay in these depressive cycles. And then we get triggered again and go way up very quickly, like, those things at the fairs where you hit the mallet and the buzzer goes up, hits the bell.
Right.
So we hit the mallet, triggering our trauma. We shoot back up into this very Rajasic state, and then we plummet out of exhaustion down into tamasic state, and that just cycles.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah. And that you can imagine that already living in a society where it's quite vata inducing, where there's a lot of multitasking, there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of, the mobile devices, all this, that we're already at a base level where our nervous system is quite activated.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
so
that's why people can't meditate.
Yeah. So could you give some tips for somebody who maybe, obviously, you have to sit with somebody or you have to analyze somebody and talk with them about their specific experience, but can you give some dinacharya that you recommend or some other practices, mindfulness practices that you recommend for somebody who has this traumatic experience?
Let's look at it. Let's use the organization of tendency and of dosha and manas prakriti to understand this, because I think that'll give us the tips pretty quickly.
Perfect. And before you start, can you explain manas prakriti for the listeners?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So manas prakriti means basically your mental constitution. Mm-hmm. So manas is a cover term often used it means mind. In the model of the mind in yogic and Ayurvedic psychology, manas really refers to the senses.
Yeah.
So as the senses bring in the world to you, that's how, my eye sees, I'm looking outside right now at some water. Mm-hmm. And so that image is going into my occipital ridge in my brain, occipital lobe, in my brain. And it's pulling into my chitta, my memory bank. Mm-hmm. And it's pulling into my ahamkara, how what my personal association is right now with water in this form of Kathryn. And it's checking into my buddhi, my discernment, like, is there some other message there for me? And I'm in a split second having an experience that I can understand. Right. That's the idea of the mind in yogic and Ayurvedic psychology in like a nutshell. Yes. So the manas prakriti is that function in that way. And depending on what you have been doing every single day in your daily habits, and again, for people who are vata dominant, what that means is the dysregulated regulation that you have. That's
right.
what vata does, right?
Yeah.
Kapha, it's what you do every day. Uh-huh. And for pitta, it's what you haven't burned out with yet. Yeah. Okay, how that works, right? But so that over the course of time, and I mean over the course of months and months and years, denotes your current mindset. Mm-hmm. And that's why if you pull a group of yoga practitioners and you sort of say, okay, put arms up, who's been practicing for 1 year, who's been practicing for 5 years, or Tai Chi masters, or any of the sort of mindfulness embodied practices we have, you'll see that over the course of time, as people practice whatever the mindfulness practice is, it's not just that yoga is the only one, but it's really quite an elegant system, then they'll be able to tell you the change as they look back over the decade as to their mindset.
Yes.
And it does create a difference. Of course, Ayurveda would say, well, then it also should be changing or giving you more awareness to be more skillful in what you choose to nourish yourself with. And then how you choose to rest, which is like the R word, rest, which no one gives you a bonus. Oh, hey, Colette, you did a great job resting this month. I'm going to give you, here's an extra $100 in your paycheck for good yoga nidra. I know. It should be like, you did your yoga nidra every other day, 100 extra for you. We get rewarded for being hypomanic and for, spending an extra 20 hours of the job. Right. So anyhow, suffice it to say that the manas prakriti has to do with everything that we're taking in from the outer world and how we're understanding it from our own internal locus of control. And the way we look at the management of stress response is by understanding how the dosha constitution, that tendency, interfaces with our current mindset. So if your current mindset's more, if the pendulum's been swinging more towards sattva for you for the last, 4 or 5, 6 years, whatever it might be, even the last year, we'll give you the last year, you have a tendency maybe to have less of a rajasic and tamasic response to stress. Good for you.
Right.
That's great.
That's great. Yeah.
And you'll start harmonizing more with that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
If you've been, if your stress response tends to be to take action, to go shopping more, to stay on the computer longer, to, I don't know, decorate and then redecorate, decorate, whatever those, tendencies are that are highly motivating, not necessarily bad things. You aren't doing, you're not out mainlining heroin. That would be bad. Okay.
Yes.
But you're doing things that are just super active.
Yes.
That's more of a vatic tendency in stress.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? It's a disbursement of energy.
Yep. It's that constant movement, excess movement. Yeah.
And oftentimes it's also complete isolation. Because remember, vata is made up of air and ether. So her tendency also sometimes is to become completely isolated.
Oh, yes.
And that's why vatas often will waste or lose lots of weight in stress response. They just will shut down.
Yeah.
So that becomes tamasic.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's how vatas are tamasic in that way, is they isolate and they just stop nourishing themselves.
Yeah, so true.
Right? So that's a tamasic response. The rajasic response to stress, that mindset for vata is a disbursement of energy. Restless leg syndrome, a lot of, lack of focus and anxiety, classic stress response symptoms of, irregular heartbeat, lightness of breath, these kinds of things are more of a vatic response. A pitic response, as I said earlier, is, get mad, get rashes, get inflammation of the physical body, reactivity, not thinking, so quickly reactive. I mean, that's a tendency for all of us, but it tends to get inflamed with vata because of our intense nature and the spreading nature and the liquid nature of pitta.
Yes, that makes sense. Yeah.
So that's our rajasic response, and the tamasic response from pitta is usually self-hatred. Yeah, we're really, I always say for my pitta friends, our expectation of the world is right about chest level for us, but our expectations for ourselves are beyond the roof and the sky.
Right, and does that coincide, you think, with the perfectionist tendencies that pitta tends to have? Yeah,
it's funny. I think perfectionism is both pittic and kaphic to some degree. More so for pitta for sure, but kapha has the attention to detail that pitta often doesn't.
That's true.
We're just efficient. Pitta's, I'm not going to cry. I am your editing worst nightmare. Ask Kat at YI. She gets my article and she's like, oh, okay. But I will win the article race. Like if 4 of us have articles to write, I want to beat your time in getting it in, which is ridiculous. Okay. And completely ego driven and is my tendency as a pitta because I want to be efficient,
Yes.
I want to be efficient. I want to do yoga. I want to win Shavasana. I don't really know what that means, but I kind of like the idea of it as I say it.
Yeah.
Because pittas, and that's the drive. So I don't know if it's perfectionism, yes, but it's our drive.
But
our drive to win.
I agree because I'm predominantly pitta as well, pitta kapha. But I agree. It's that efficiency, get it done, but it doesn't necessarily have to be absolutely perfect. Yeah.
No, not really. Because if we can win, who cares if it's perfect? You know what I'm saying? I was saying. Where my kapha friends, I drive them nuts because they go into my office and there's always that I get that look and that, oh, Kathryn, sweet Kathryn, come here. Bring it in for a hug, girl. Okay. we're going to put all of these papers you've hoarded on the top of your desk because you were efficiently moving through them into alphabetized files. And I immediately want to stab my eyes out with forks. I'm like, no, it'll take time.
Yes.
So the tendency for kapha is for the tamasic tendency for kapha and stress is to pull the covers over their head, right? They're going to hide out. They're going to dig their heels in and hide out, or hunker down, as we say at my house. My son Webster likes to hunker down. We're like, Webby, we're going to go somewhere. And he's like, no. And I'm like, no, we're going to go. It'll be fun. And it's like he's like a protester on the Golden Gate Bridge in the 70s. He just lays down and you have to scrape him up with a spatula. Tendency, right? They're really good at it too. You can't move those people. You just can't do it. Just surrender right there. That's tamasic.
Right.
And then the rajasic tendency of kapha is to start organizing, to keep journals of their journals, right? Okay. And then to alphabetize or color organize the schema of the journal. They can't move to the next thing until this thing has been completely, systemized. Uh-huh. It's active, but it's active in a very systemic manner, The other thing I noticed that is a tendency, in women and men, of course, handle stress differently via gender as well. Right. So the gender tendency for women is to tend and befriend. So when we feel stressed, we tend to go to our girlfriend's house, have a cup of tea and some cookies and talk it through, and there's like some rubbing of the shoulders and some petting of the brow, that sort of thing. It's a tend and befriend, and that's how the oxytocin gets, stimulated, and that feel good sort of hormone comes through us. Yeah. Men tend to activate and solve. Right. Want to activate and solve. Now, this is, I can say this with confidence because I've seen the research, but Pitta women are a bit of solvers as well. Mm-hmm. It's a tendency of ours in that way. It's a healthy tendency, but it's not gender specific. So we still tend and befriend, but the goddesses of the tend and befriend stress response are the kaphas.
Yes.
There is nobody better to go to tend and befriend than your kapha sister.
I agree.
And even the kapha men, you're just like, bring it in. You're like, it's hug bear. You're like, I'm coming in. It's the best.
Yes.
But it gets them into trouble because when they're stressed out, they often start taking care of others in a very motivated way. Mm-hmm. And it can be a little smothering for the partner. I'm not going to lie. Yeah. All right. Just, I mean that in a kind way. Yeah. But, and it's a way for them not to focus on themselves. And the group of people I'm thinking of that I see this the most in are my nurse friends.
Yes.
So, I mean, I live in New Haven, and I used to see quite a number of the nurses from Yale New Haven Hospital in St. Rafe's at the time, working on trauma or oncology or in the ER. And these gals would often be having issues with weight management, having issues with getting exercise routines done because they're so overwhelmed by their jobs. Yeah. They tend to pull extra shifts to help out the other nurses that can't do it for whatever reason. There's a lot of beautiful intention in caregiving, but it's not in balance. Yeah. And that's a kaphic tendency in stress as well. So there's all kinds of behaviors that you see that are dosha and manas specific. But the ones that create issues for us in our stress response are the ones that lead us down the pathway toward anxiety, depression, and or having that anxiety, depression flip-flop that we see, the cycle. Yeah.
Yeah. So what would your advice, some advice to somebody who is experiencing that?
Well, it would depend. Of course, that's the I mantra that we all know and love.
Yeah. No one size fits all. Yeah.
Right. But the first thing to do, the first thing I instruct my students to do, and that I do when I work with individuals or with groups, is I ask everybody to sit down and let me know kind of what they think they do to take care of themselves. I'm curious what they think they do to take care of themselves.
Interesting. Yeah. That's a great question.
I don't know. Yeah. And I don't know what their socioeconomic reality is. I don't know if they're working 2 jobs to keep their family. I worked in public health for a number of years. So when we would look at, for example, in Ayurvedic nutrition and 6 tastes, a lot of my families would go through the drive-through to feed their families because it's $1 a burger.
Right.
And they were short on time and working 2 jobs, and usually the grandparents were taking care of the kids. So it was, there wasn't a lot of time to think about food. It wasn't they don't love their children deeply and want to do the best for them, but this was what they thought was the best and what they could afford. And it took a lot of time to re-educate folks on what they could do. Mm-hmm. So, the idea is to support them from where they are. Yes. So for those individuals, I would say to them, let's get out our MIC menu or whatever the fast food place was, and we would look at the menu together and try to find warm, moist foods.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah. So easy digestible foods would be a tip. Right.
Right. And whether that is, now if you're someone that, cooks at home, mm-hmm. that's okay. Now we're going to look at that differently. Yeah. So, and if you cook for, so the person has a Vata stress response tendency and they tend to be wasting, mm-hmm. then just getting them to eat anything 3 times a day is the goal, mm-hmm. So oftentimes I would do that with the milk drinks that we have in Ayurvedic medicine.
Yes.
And that's very nourishing. You want to put the word nourish down and then highlight it and put a bunch of bunnies and unicorns around it,
right.
And take the word eat and put one of those no signs through it.
Yeah.
So that's the other first tip I try to go for with people's stress response is when you're getting ready to sit down for a meal, how am I going to nourish myself versus eat?
Yeah, you mentioned that earlier,
mm-hmm.
that you said there's a difference between nourishing and eating.
Right. Mm-hmm. Because, in Ayurveda, we look at how do our foods either nourish us or poison us.
Right.
That's, we use food as medicine, as often said, but medicine kind of triggers a lot of my clients. So, how do you nourish yourself versus eat? And I give them 80-20 rule. If you want to have your Fritos, this is the real world I live in. So Fritos are a food.
Yeah. I'm all about 80-20 too.
Yeah. So I'm like, okay, then you'll do that. And
mm-hmm.
that's fine. But then how are you going to actually nourish yourself in the day?
Right.
So that's one thing I start with. With Dinacharya, if people, generally speaking, this is people who are more tamasic, not mm-hmm. for the more Rajasic and Sattvic people, but Rajasic people too. I'll say, before you get out of bed, set your alarm 3 minutes earlier or whatever. Mm-hmm. And before you get out of bed, I want you to just thank whatever, whether it's nature or God or Muhammad or Allah mm-hmm. or whatever mm-hmm. you believe in that's a higher consciousness. Offer some gratitude that you're alive.
Yes.
Just say thank you, you're alive. Just start with that.
That's great.
Just, because that automatically starts to turn the mind toward there is a greater consciousness.
Yes.
And so that's something really simple that I'll do. Mm-hmm. Another thing I do is I always had, from the field of psychology, everybody has to make their bed.
Right. When
you get up, you make your bed.
Uh-huh.
And it's not just that my mother was like 45 and she had me, and so it wasn't done in the day. You got up and you made your bed.
Yes.
But the reality is that we know, and Claudia Welch talks a lot about this, about decision fatigue, that you want to be able to have as few decisions to make in the morning as possible. That's why we want that dinacharya, that daily routine.
Yes.
But imagine as you get ready to go to bed, what's more inviting? A bed that's been made or some crumpled set of something somewhere?
It's so true. Yeah.
And it's the first act of true self-care that you're doing to prepare you're preparing your room for your sleep as you start your day.
Yes.
And so, I try to figure out where the person is with their own daily actions. So if there's someone that really likes an orderly home, like one of my Kapha friends maybe, mm-hmm. who hasn't gotten depressed, then I will say, well, why, make your bed first thing, if then go tongue scrape, or tongue scrape, go to the bathroom, then make your bed. But let's do that first and set the tone of your day.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you for sharing those. And, even as simple as they sound, these dinacharya or simple self-care practices or rituals, like you said, they take the decision making out of the morning. You're not wasting time on, oh, should I do this now, or should I, go and do my oils abienga, or you're not just wasting mental energy trying to make those decisions, that it's in place. And that's why we put such a great emphasis on having these rituals in place, so that you're on autopilot when you get up in the morning, and then an evening routine as well.
Well, you're on autopilot of self-care.
Exactly.
That's the thing, right?
Exactly.
Because if I don't get up and make my bed, tongue scrape, and do my rest of my dinacharya before my children get up, or my dogs need to go out, I'm taking care of myself first.
Yeah.
And that's going to give me the resiliency, the ojas, the support to be able to move into the adaptability of my day. So resiliency, adaptability, and regulation all hold hands in the playground. They're best friends.
Mm-hmm.
And one builds the other. Yeah. They all support each other. So does, just like prana, tejas, and ojas, another discussion for another day. But that's what we're looking to always build and support in Ayurvedic medicine and in yoga practice. So those two sister sciences, as another thread we can weave together that they connect around.
Beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Well, wonderful. I love those insights. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Thank you.
And now I'd love to talk about your new program, which is really exciting. You've launched a new program with Yoga International called 3WT, Core Concepts, and the 3 Wisdom Traditions of Yoga, Ayurveda, and Psychology. So tell me about this program. It sounds amazing.
Well, I appreciate you asking. We just launched it yesterday, actually, and the Core Concepts is 12 hours online, and what it does is it lays the foundation of language and sort of what we've been talking about today, really, about the intersection of these, and I sort of give psychology a big boost. That's a new wisdom tradition, and
right.
Ayurveda and yoga are quite ancient, and psychology is quite modern, But anyhow, I bring her up, and the others are fine with it. So yoga, Ayurveda, and psychology, again, weaving together these 3 wisdom traditions to create a hammock of support that you can surrender within, and that's the concept. And I reached into my lineage and have Yoga Rupa Rod Stryker and Sandra Anderson talking about the philosophy of yoga, about self-evolution, and understanding how the kleshas, how our thinking patterns can be problematic from this wheel of samskara, vasana, and karma, which is part of the yoga tradition. And then I reached into my supervisors and colleagues in the field of psychology here in New Haven, Dr. Alice Forrester and Kristen Hale, who I've known for 30 years and are just amazing leaders in the field of integrative wellness and psychiatry. And they talk about different clinical paradigms around intentional communities for healing trauma response. We do some talk about what is projection and what is some of the thinking patterns, cognitive triangle. So more about Western psychology, and of course, both of them have their own practices that they also link back into. Right. And then Dr. Rosie Mann and Sarah Guliami talk about Sattva Jaya and Sattva Jaya Chikitsa, which is Sanskrit for moving the mind towards sattva, which is how we work with psychological healing in Ayurvedic medicine.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So now, and who is this course geared for?
So, well, it's a three modules. So this core concepts really, I think anybody from any of the healing traditions, either yoga therapists, Ayurvedic health counselors or practitioners, social workers, nurses, elementary school teachers, they'll all appreciate core concepts. And then the second program, which will go online in 2019, we're doing in-person learning labs with me in several spots around the country and in Dominican Republic. But that's a way we apply that theory. So it's applied science labs. So we run mock group therapies, we run individual therapies. So you can see how to apply these within a scope of practice that has integrity for non-licensed professionals. So you can bring your tool sets into an action from your expertise. So if you're a yoga therapist, you can certainly bring that wisdom in and then add on the concepts from the wisdom tradition of psychology and Ayurveda to support what you're already doing.
That's great. Just making them well-rounded toolbox.
Yeah, and it's a general application. We don't get into disease management.
Right.
We're really looking at managing stress response. We're managing general anxiety symptoms, general tamasic issues, which could become depressive situations, or just melancholy. That's a beautiful word that isn't necessarily clinical, but can be a difficult place to hold yourself in the world. And then the third part of that whole process of Three Wisdom Tradition wellness coach is we have a series of phone or supervision calls or mentoring calls, I think we call them. And that's where I do case reviews with two of the other wellness coaches I've already trained. One's a social worker and one's a yoga teacher. And we talk about 10 different cases we have dealing with stress response with anxiety issues, stress response with melancholy or depressive issues, and stress response with digestive and with sleep-related issues. And so you listen to those phone calls, and that helps you with your scope of practice to know when to refer people out, for example, and some important ethics that we discuss in those as well.
Wonderful. I love it. It sounds fantastic. Now, you mentioned it is good for someone like an elementary school teacher who doesn't necessarily have any have much knowledge of Ayurveda or yoga, maybe takes a yoga class now and again, maybe has been introduced some mindfulness practices. Would that a person with that in that situation be able to go into the course and follow along pretty easy? Okay, great.
Well, not about easy, but they would be able, the thing about, I bring up elementary school teachers specifically. It's so funny you caught that because I think they're some of the wisest people I've ever met. Well, and crazy. I'm just going to say it.
Well, it's such a job of devotion.
Yeah, it is. And you have to be a little bit you got to be a little bit adaptable, right? Yes. You're working with children, and you have to have durability because it's not a light day.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot more understanding of human psychology and about the nature of development from an educational perspective in not just elementary, but middle school, high school, in educators in general. And they will struggle a little bit with some of the language in the Yoga and Ayurveda section, but we have a printed manual and a PDF manual that you can download that has a lot of information in it. And then we point you to where you can go on Yoga International if you, for example, feel like, I don't really get six tastes. I don't understand that. Mm-hmm. So I have some articles there, and Dr. Duyard has some articles there that talk more about that.
Great. That's wonderful. Yes, because I'm passionate about getting Ayurveda, getting the kids young, understanding about Ayurveda so that they can manage this new world, and that because they're inundated with technology and it's just and feeling a little bit more isolated in the world. There's less of that community feel sometimes. So I think if teachers are aware of this and bringing those practices back into their classroom, how amazing would that be?
Yeah, just ritual, just seasonal ritual, nothing else. And you said it there, right there. The level of Vata and Rajasic imbalance is profound. The isolation we have with technology is not necessarily bad in and of itself, but the reality is it blows those winds of Vata, and it leans in on itself and creates more isolation.
Yes. Yeah.
So if you don't learn natural ways of creating community, which is an art form, then if you aren't natural at that, and it's not your tendency anyhow, if you're somewhat Vata dominant, let's say, it's really going to be difficult for you to be able to reach out when you need to. So certainly the younger you are, even if your family is not very social, the connections you learn to make through the group of your peers at school, which is like a group therapy, really.
Yes.
You learn how to navigate those personalities and those archetypes, those groups. It really will help you be able to be less isolative as you get older and as you become in need of support because of a stressor that might be impending upon you.
Yeah, I think they're just such valuable tools to learn at a young age, because really the kids coming in today, the young children, they're learning that, a lot of their community, they obviously go to school unless they're homeschooled, but then their community is a lot online, and that's a very different community from...
Oh, well, you don't know who it is. I mean...
Yeah, absolutely. And you're communicating via technology. So that in itself is vata inducing. So it's a very interesting world we live in, and going back to these ancient wisdoms to help us navigate this new world order.
Yeah, exactly. And and it's great that, I love the podcast opportunities, like what you and your colleagues are doing, because it, again, if you're going to be driving a distance, or if you're going to be going on a journey and you're going to need some ways to distract yourself, being able to listen to information is a wonderful opportunity. Right. And it's hard to get the word out about Ayurveda without it becoming so challenging because of the language, I think, for Americans.
Yes.
And so I think it's really useful to be able to, have these conversations and be able to listen to them. So thank you.
Yeah. Oh, my pleasure. And thank you for coming on. So let's share with the listeners where they can find more information on your courses.
So I'm available through the Himalayan Institute, and it's himalayaninstitute.org. So that's where the Ayurvedic Yoga Specialist course and the Ayurvedic Health Counselor course are held, and they're an amazing group at the Himalayan Institute that has a vast history with a fabulous educator. So I'm really honored to be able to bring the programs there. And then on Yoga International, yogainternational.com is where you can find the 3 wisdom traditions, or 3WT. And I guess another spot you can find me, some of my blog work is at Banyan Botanicals. I'm an ambassador for this wonderful company that sells amazing, high-quality herbal products, banyanbotanicals.com. And then my website, which is KathrynTempleton.com. So
great. And for everybody listening, I'm going to put links to all those in the show notes. And we love Banyan Botanicals here on the show. We did a whole episode with them explaining their amazing process of producing their high quality products. So
yeah,
love those guys. Well, thanks, Kathryn. That's great. And I hope that everybody will check out those links in the show notes and check out all these wonderful programs. So as we wrap up here, Kathryn, is there any little piece of Ayurvedic wisdom or advice or yogic wisdom, whatever you feel called to, that you want to leave the listeners with today?
I'll tell you what, we've been editing a lot of the 3WT material, and this little framework always comes back to me that Kristen Hale shared, and I think several business icons share it too, but it's great, which is that if you can show up, pay attention, work hard, be honest, have integrity, and let go of the product, life will become much easier and much more joyful and meaningful for you.
That sounds fantastic. Can you repeat that one more time?
Yep. So it's show up. That's the hardest thing. The hardest thing is showing up, and not just physically, emotionally, mentally, all the koshas, everybody show up. Pay attention, work hard, have integrity, be honest with yourself. It's not about having integrity so much in the outer world, but with yourself. True. Have integrity. True. And then let go of your attachment to the outcome.
Wow. I love it.
So, yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. That's what I'm trying to do.
I hear you. It's wonderful work you're doing in the world, and we truly appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your wisdom with us. And I've learned a lot today. So thank you so much, Kathryn.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much for offering this opportunity. It's great.
Yeah, I love it, and I'd love to have you back on again.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, Kathryn. Take good care of yourself.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Kathryn. I know I certainly learned a lot. She's a wealth of information. We talked a lot in this episode about daily self-care practices, or what Ayurveda calls dinacharya. And I do offer a 4-week self-guided online daily habits for holistic health course. I'll put a link to that in the show notes if you're interested in implementing some of these very important but simple self-care practices to keep you in balance so that you can thrive in life. Just check out the show notes for that link, and also for all of the links to Kathryn's courses and blogs and other information. Thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate your support on the podcast. If you would like to rate and review the podcast, I would really appreciate it, and you can do that in iTunes. And again, thank you for listening. And if you have any feedback, please contact me. And you can do that in our podcast group, the Facebook group called Elements of Ayurveda Podcast Group. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes also. It's a great place where you can ask questions, give feedback, and we can connect and support each other. Okay, take good care of yourself and be well.